Hello and welcome to this month's webinar from CyberClan. During this webinar today we will be discussing the changes to the ransomware sanctions in the UK throughout 2022 and the impact that this will have on the cyber insurance landscape and the general cyber risk to insurers in the UK over the next 24 months. I'm Louise Jose, the marketing coordinator here at CyberClan, and today I am joined by an impressive group of panelists who will be offering insights from a legal, insurance and also post-breach remediation perspective. Over the years, CyberClan has helped thousands of clients through a cyber incident. We're based across the United States, Canada and the UK, giving us global reach with our services to help those in need. I will now invite our panelists to join us. Hi, so today we are joined by Harry Tucker from Axis Capital, Ollie Dent from Kennedy's and Kadir Levent from CyberClan. Harry, let's start with you if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Harry Tucker. I'm a senior claims adjuster at Axis Capital, operating out of the London market. And my specialty is in cyber and tech and media.
Brilliant. Ollie.
Hi everyone, my name is Ollie Dent. I'm a partner at Kennedy's. Kennedy's is an international law firm, and I co-lead the cyber team at Kennedy's. Based out of the UK, we've got a team of 20 lawyers who specialise in responding to data breaches and cyber attacks. And we've got a global team that help us and support us on global incidents as well.
Brilliant, thank you. And Kadir.
Hi everyone, I'm Kadir. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at CyberClan. It's been an amazing journey, and we've worked with many of these individuals in the past, so Harry and Ollie, on many incidents. So I take care of the operations at CyberClan, and we are an international organisation now across the US, Canada and the UK. We are now over 120 employees, for those who didn't know, so we are continuing to scale operations and supporting specifically in the cyberspace around incident response, post-breach remediation, and supporting our clients during these ransomware type incidents.
Brilliant, thank you. So today we'll be running a sort of Q&A session between ourselves, so panel discussion. However, we will be taking questions and answering those at the end of our discussion. So if you do think that there's anything that we might have missed or something that you'd like us to elaborate on, please do enter that into the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll try and get those answered at the end for you. So the first thing that I'd like us to cover today is, as we know, we're running through a very turbulent political climate at the moment, and insurers are facing an increase in issues and concerns that they may have to be wary of when dealing with ransomware sanctions and the need for payment. Could you talk us through this a little more, please, Harry?
Yeah, so yeah, I think when I agreed to this in, I don't know, January, December time, I had no idea that it was gonna, blow up into probably a large amount of work from about end of February onwards. But yeah, I think to clarify in the first instance, cyber itself is not unique in having to deal with sanctions. I think this is something that other lines of business and insurance have to deal with on a regular basis, and just other businesses in general. And I think as well, it is a big concern for insurance sanctions, because we're talking about strict liability here, especially in respect of the US sanction regime, where regardless of whether you knew that the payment was to a sanctioned entity or not, or whether that payment was made directly or indirectly, strict liability applies. It's just you are liable for that payment. I think where cyber's kind of unique challenges lie is kind of the first one is that we're often responding, at least in the case of ransomware, to criminality. So these guys are remaining anonymous or trying to remain as anonymous as possible, or have pseudonyms. And then also the kind of built-in anonymity that the cryptocurrency that these guys are demanding payment in kind of affords. So I think these are the first two kind of issues. And then the other kind of big second issue is that I don't think we can get away from the fact that a great deal of these threat actor groups are based around the former Soviet bloc, which is currently a big target of sanctions activity. So we've been dealing with these, cyber insurance has been dealing with at least the first two issues around anonymity for some time. And we've been continuing to refine our sanctions due diligence processes, and even just in general, trying to create a kind of standard for dealing with ransomware matters in general, but also including that due diligence process, which I think has come out, which can be seen kind of in the output of the recent LMA guidance document for ransomware. And I think that the due diligence that we're doing right now is actually quite sophisticated, and I think where cyber insurance has evolved and where demanding this kind of due diligence, this is again with our partners in forensic and legal leading the way towards kind of best market practice. But the issue that comes about with that is having to kind of investigate investigate deeper into these wallets and into these threat actor groups, because of that aforementioned anonymity issue. There's kind of an issue of how these links, potential links are, whether they're conclusive, whether they're just purely circumstantial. So I think there's a great deal of noise around these groups anyway, but I think with the recent war in Ukraine and the expansion of the sanctions regime to include certain territories around the Ukrainian region, organizations within Russia, and pretty much a blanket wide individual sanctions against individuals who have any kind of association with the Russian regime has added to this noise, and I think is potentially everyone kind of understands the implications that the potential for these links, as we're investigating, and trying to do our due diligence, the potential for these links is getting higher, and also that these links are going to be, any potential breach of sanctions or any kind of, you're skirting on the line is probably going to be looked at quite stringently by regulators because of, the political situation. And then finally, to add to the bad news, or not to the bad news, but to add to the complications, is actually, ransomware is now, in the public consciousness, and therefore it's now getting a lot of, it's getting looked at and it's becoming a focus by a lot of governments in the West. And, we're certainly, happy for this. I think this, it's a level of criminality that, kind of went crazy in 2019 and 2020 that, needed to be, looked at. But I think along with that, welcome development, I think we have to kind of understand that the ground's going to, be shifting beneath our feet, for ransomware, at a fast and potentially continual pace, for as long as, especially now with the political situation between the West and Russia. So the challenges that this all face, and I think what I'm seeing from an insurance perspective is I think we're starting to see kind of varying risk tolerances of insureds, of vendors, of insurers when it comes to these ransom payments. And I think that is natural, and especially now with that kind of watershed moment with the invasion of Ukraine, that there is, a level of disruption and uncertainty while we're kind of adjusting to this new normal. Yeah. But I think also we're having to deal with the fact that due diligences are getting put under kind of greater scrutiny by, expanded levels of, interested parties. People are asking to see it. People are having, saying, hold on, I need to take this to my compliance. and we are seeing, unfortunately, at this point in time, this is kind of, there's the cover aspect and reimbursement around ransom payments is getting a bit stickier at the moment, and it's getting, it's lengthening. And I think we're having to do that, but at the same time as well, we're also having to balance the fact that, this market, has hardened quite significantly, over the past couple of years. So, insureds, we're dealing with insureds that have, often gone through, quite tough renewal processes, a lot of technical queries, and often increased premiums. So there's also the level of expectation from them that the product does what it says on the tin. So I think that those are the kind of challenges we're having to face at this point. I think, we're meeting them head on. And I think as well, it's given us that further impetus to further refine our ransomware, sanctions, processes and due diligences. So I think, it's certainly something that's not, insurmountable by the cyber market. And it's certainly something we've got a track record in doing.
Brilliant. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Now, Ollie, this also has ramifications when it comes to the advice that you'd offer as breach counsel.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I mean, there's certainly a heightened awareness in the market at the moment, and we've got to be tuned into that. However, I'd say that this is an issue that's been with us since the dawn of ransomware. We've always had to be fall in line with any sanctions regimes, both in the US and the UK and any other regimes that are relevant. But the current situation that we're finding ourselves in at the moment has really put a magnifying glass over that. And so when we've been dealing with ransomware attacks over the past few weeks or so, the issues of sanctions, whilst they've always been around, have probably become number one priority rather than further down the list of priorities, because of the heightened awareness and the political issues involved. And for some organizations that we've dealt with, they are now just flat refusing to enter into any negotiations because of the risks. For others, they are considering it very, very carefully. But I don't think it changes things to some extent, because we've always had to consider sanctions regime as part of the balancing exercise when advising clients as to whether what the considerations around paying a ransom are, right? So that's just one of the many considerations that we need to think about. And ultimately it has to be seen as a last resort because of the risks involved in paying any ransom demand. So it certainly put it to the top of the list, I would say, in terms of the considering those risks. And it's changing it can change on a daily or an hourly basis at the moment as well. So if you do find yourselves, or any company finds itself in a position where they do want to proceed with a payment to a ransomware group, then I think it would be important that any sanctions checked are carried out at the last possible moment, because of the fact that things can change so quickly. And in the time between carrying out those checks, and if there's a delay over a 24-hour period, the sanctions regime could change in that 24-hour period. So it's a fluid situation at the moment, and we've just got to be really tuned into that and make sure that our clients are aware of that fluidity and aware of the increased risks around generally paying anyone who may be seen to be connected with Russia, or any designated people on the sanctions lists, whether it's the OFAC list in the US or the UK sanctions lists.
Yeah, and it's not just insurers and lawyers that have to keep up with all of this information and keeping an eye on sanctions either, because as incident responders ourselves, that's something we need to keep an eye on as well, isn't that, Kadir?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we have all the legal obligations, so around sanctions, around understanding what these are and what the ever-changing landscape looks like. But I think what it's also brought to a head is the ethical side of things as well, right? So it's insureds and insurance companies, in fact, anybody that's going to be paying these demands now, are actually thinking twice, because they can see what's going on in other parts of the world, and they're thinking, okay, am I actually funding that? You know, am I supporting that by paying this ransom, even though it might not be a sanctioned entity or a sanctioned group or whatever you want to call it? I think, you know, going back to what Harry said earlier, it's brought everything to a head, right? And it's so much more in the public domain now. And like Ollie said, we've had ransomware for a few years now. It's no different to what we dealt with before. The difference is now, it's just the volatility around everything that's going on in the world. So when it comes to, you know, facilitating these payments, being that negotiator when it comes down to this, there is definitely additional layers now that we need to think about when it comes to dealing with our clients, and kind of giving them the information that they need, so that they can make the right choices for themselves as individuals and as businesses.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, although payment is really the last resort, none of us want to be making that payment. If there's any way of restoring from backup, you know, people like CyberClan are going to be working hard to try and find that way in, aren't we? So but now there's also that real issue around the morality of the payment as well. So that's all stuff that we have to consider, and that the client has to consider too. It's not just about saving their business, it's also about where that money's going, which is
I'd add as well that we've seen instances recently where, you know, an insured might not even have that, you know, great backups, but they still are refusing to, it's not even in the discussion, you know, whether they're going to engage with these threat actors or not. It's just, they're not going to do it. And, you know, we as insurers have to you know, support the insured, you know, when it comes to that as well. You know, we have to support the insured in respect of, you know, if they want to go down that route. And I think we also have to support the insured if they want to go down payment route. But by doing so, we need to be making sure that everyone is, you know, in the entire value chain is being kind of protected here. Because, you know, these sanctions checks aren't just for, you know, insurers. They're for the clients, they're for the forensic providers, they're for, you know, there's wide ranging implications all through the value chain. So I think, you know, the sanctions checks that we're doing, you know, are that support as well.
Yeah, and there's
as well, Harry, is that I think the issues that have come up at the moment are really helping focus the attention on the reasons behind a payment being made, and you know, whilst there's always going to be those considerations, the fact that we've got this additional risk, I think, just is making companies really question what is the benefit of paying this, because not only is there always risks around paying ransom demands, you may get re-extortion, you know, the fact that if there's been data exfiltration, it doesn't really change the risk in terms of that data. It's that risk has crystallized when it's gone outside of the environment. And so what is the benefit? And unless the company is absolutely on its knees with no backups and will fail tomorrow, then you really question what is the benefit. And so in some ways, these new issues, I say new, the spotlight that's been put on sanctions recently is actually helping address those questions around the value in paying criminals, and really making organizations think twice, I think.
We've definitely experienced that same shift as well, right? So where historically, not in all cases, but historically, you'd have the default position is, well, we need to engage. We need to see what's going on here. We need to pay. That's become more of a second thought now by an insured, which is a good thing, because we're always there to support that message. We're always there to say, look, there are other ways we can try and get your data back, you know, and sometimes insureds forget where data is actually stored and how to access that information again. And they think just because a system's encrypted, there's no way of getting that data back or reconstituting that data. But the fact is, most data is either transmitted electronically or it's stored in multiple places. So you may be able to reconstitute even 50%, 60% of that data. So now going back to your point, does paying really make a big difference? Actually, what is the value in that? And even then, there's no real guarantee that you're going to get everything back. And it's not the golden bullet. It's not all of a sudden going to bring everything back. If you pay a ransom, you're not going to all of a sudden get access to all of your data as if nothing happened. It doesn't work like that. So there's also that false sense of security. Again, there's now a lot more questions being asked and considerations being made prior to even thinking about whether or not we should be engaging. So it's definitely, again, an ever-changing landscape, I'd say.
It's a real tough one, isn't it? Because, you know, you might think that by paying, you're going to get your decryption key, it's going to work like magic and unencrypt everything straight away. But that, as Ollie pointed out, if that data has been exfiltrated in the first place, which basically means it's been stolen from your systems and stored somewhere else by the threat actor, that means that, you know, there's no guarantee that that data is ever going to be deleted from their systems. They can, one person might say it, but someone else might have a copy somewhere else. Threat actor groups aren't like a renowned organization with rules in place that stop one person doing something else. They're basically all individuals working together for a shared goal, and at the end of the day, it only takes one to steal that data from the rest of the group and ship it off somewhere to stop something happening. So yes, realistically, restoring from backup and trying to find at least partial amounts of data is probably the best way to go. So Harry, I've got another one for you. A lot of insureds have put sub limits in place to lower ransomware payments. What impact do we feel that this will have on the cyber insurance landscape and the greater cyber risk to insureds over the next 24 months?
Yeah, well, I have to admit that I haven't dealt with myself too many ransomware sub limits or co-insurance. At this point in time, I don't think I have a lot of policies in force or claims that have that there. But I think I can at least kind of speak towards what. Firstly, I think those sub limits or co-insurance represent, and also perhaps the implications behind it. I think in the first instance, I think it's an interesting thing in that it's showing perhaps that insurers with all these challenges we were I was talking about at the beginning, and also perhaps the quite horrendous 2019 and 2020 for ransomware we had, is that when it comes to ransom payments, there is perhaps a reduced appetite for the transfer of that risk. That's the insured can't shift that risk over to insurers in the same way they used to before. I wonder whether that's simply a symptom of a hard market rather than a general sea change. But I don't think we'll kind of know that until until the market softens and we've kind of gone through a softening period. But I think with these sub limits that are coming in now, and as I'd mentioned previously as well, the quite technical and in-depth proposal forms, that are that are further deep dive into any kind of perspective or current renewing insured systems. While the sub limits might go away when when the market softens, I think those questions aren't that level of technical expertise that the underwriters have, and also that kind of expectation around minimum security standards that underwriters are going to have going forward. So I don't know whether sub limits are here to stay. I think the questions being asked, and perhaps also this new sanctions spotlight that's now being shown on any potential ransomware payments, might be solving that issue anyway. But I think it's probably, it might be rather than a side effect, it might be rather the goal, though, that when an insured gets this policy and they've gone through a tough renewal and probably paid quite a bit more than they did previously in a soft market for this policy, and then sees the sub limit or co-insurance, sees they're on a co-insurance hook or have a sub limit on a ransom payment on the policy. I think that makes the kind of the financial implication of not having your backups, not having recent and separated backups, and not even having, let's say an Alamo type backup like Kadir was mentioning, 60, 70%, something that, maybe is a little bit older, but, unless the building burns down, you've got access to them. I think that financial implication of a ransomware event is immediate right then and there when they get their policy and see their, see their limits and see everything like that. Whereas I think previously it was, it was always said the best insured to have was one that had already had a cyber event because they kind of knew actually what it was all about. Whereas now I think we're trying to push that, further in and say, look, this is something that is serious and we're not going to accept, the full risk for this. So yeah, before any incident has occurred, the insured's kind of aware of that. So yeah, I'm kind of agnostic on sublimits and co-insurance, because maybe one, I haven't seen enough, I haven't seen the, enough of them in the insured psychology. I think that's an important thing to see is how it affects how, companies react to these sublimits during a claim scenario. But also too, because I'm just not sure whether they're, an actual sea change or if they're just kind of a symptom of this hard market and that kind of, that, almost like PTSD from 2019 and 2020 of those ransomware, that ransomware spike.
Yeah, we did see a lot of activity during that time, didn't we? Kadir, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think I can approach that from a slightly sort of different perspective, and that is, some of you may be aware there was some recent sort of communications that were leaked from the Conti ransomware group. And we actually got our hands on those and we had a look through. I mean, they're obviously out there in the public domain now, right? Lots of different individuals have distributed those. But what was really interesting when you read through these, and we kind of knew this was part of the MO anyways, and it's not just the Conti group, there's various other groups that follow this same MO, is that they are actively looking for insurance documents during a breach, and they then use that to build what they build their demands. So what they're going to be asking for when it comes to their ransomware demand. And we often see it, and I'm sure Ollie's seen it as well. They're coming in it's just ironic. You have a $1 million policy or £1 million policy, and they come in with £1 million demand, or they start higher and they negotiate down to basically the top of your limit. So
we've even had it so the threat actors have sent us a copy of the policy and they've drawn a red ring around the limit of indemnity.
We had a webinar previously with one of our guys, Chris Halling Brown, on before, who actually heads up the CERT team, and he said exactly the same thing. They've had that with, they've seen it circled. Yeah. This is how much you owe. Which is crazy.
So going back to the sub, well, they do, and going back to the sub limits. So that's where I think it's going to be interesting to see if the demands are gradually going to come down, because otherwise insurers are physically not in a position to be able to pay it. They can't pay it unless they've got, and if they can pay it, then that's a different level of organization, right? So I think it's going to be really interesting to see that shift over a period of time, to see how that reflects what's going out in terms of sublimits and then ransom demands, etc., etc. So that's what I'm looking forward to see.
Brilliant. So my next question, obviously, based off of that answer, I feel like I know where we're going to be headed with this one. But what advice could we offer anyone watching today when it comes to going through a ransomware attack? What can we put in place to be prepared? What can we do to make sure that we're not attacked? and what can we do, in case we are, so that there's not that panic that is obviously going to set in when you notice that everything's encrypted and you've not got access to anything. So Ollie's nodding his head. Let's start with you.
Yeah. Well, I think it's so. Put it this way: when we're engaged on cyber incidents, the first people we talk to is the board of directors.
Yeah.
And it's so when you have an incident, it's immediately a boardroom incident. It's a boardroom issue. So I think the first thing to say is that these issues, this cyber security and the sort of general cyber hygiene across any organization has to be a board level issue. It's not just something that can be dealt with by a lone wolf in an IT department who thinks he doesn't have a budget. So I think that's the first thing, because particularly going back to what we've been discussing around potential sub limits coming in, I think companies really have to have some skin in the game here and back themselves with these issues and invest in the right areas. So and the only way to do that really is to have this being approved at board level, and you have appropriate budgets but boards need advice. So I think the second thing there is that I'd encourage any organization to take professional advice around this, because it's a changing landscape. It changes every day, let alone every week or every month. And in order to try and stay ahead, I think it's really important that any organization gets assistance from professionals with experience of dealing with these sort of incidents. And once you start infiltrating into the board level, perhaps having a report delivered to the board every quarter with updates from professionals in the industry in terms of what you need to be focusing on, that means that the budget is going in the right places. And that's the only thing you can do. In many ways, there's no way of keeping ahead of these very sophisticated criminal organizations entirely, but it's important that everything is done to try your very best to do that. And from a legal and regulatory perspective, that's really important, because as in the event that an incident does occur, then the regulator is going to be looking at what measures were put in place, and they'll be questioning whether or not this was a boardroom issue previously. Because if it's not, then they're going to start poking around in terms of what went wrong and why it went wrong. So it's very simplistic, but I think it's getting the right messages to the right people in any business.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
I think
Ollie brings up
sanctions as well. Like looping it back to the sanctions, just going back to that ever-changing landscape. I think what a board might know at this moment in time is going to be very different to what someone like Ollie knows or what I know and the team knows. So we'll be able to give that advice of what course of actions are even available at that moment in time. So I think just bringing in the right people. But I'll hand over to Harry.
Yeah, I think Ollie makes a good point there, which is kind of brought into, perhaps isn't really a sanctions issue, but kind of is brought into the fore with the recent ICO, fine on the on Tucker Solicitors. Yeah, no affiliation here, but yeah, I think it's showing that, look, even like insureds that are perhaps going off and paying perhaps sketchy, perhaps the sanctions is looking a bit sketchy, and if they do get dinged by OFAC here, I think there might not be that much sympathy for them. This isn't a kidnap and ransom thing. This is something that regulators are going to start expecting that companies are taking the appropriate remediation or perhaps proactive steps to avoid having to pay these ransoms, and I think that's only going to get tougher, because I think it's been relatively kind of hands off when it comes to ransomware, saying, yeah, we get it, you're a victim of crime, which of course they are, but I think it's only going to start getting looked at closer by regulators. The the preemptive steps that are being taken by companies for instances such as ransomware.
That's where things like, having instant response plans in place and working with your breach coach to make sure that you've got all those steps sort of in place already, but then also utilizing services like running tabletop exercises and stuff like that as well means that you can sit down and run through that plan, make sure you from a board level perspective, as well as the managers and the internal teams within the company know what the protocol is when it comes to an attack, making sure that dipstick in the marketing department doesn't press the button that says we've had a breach, and then next thing you know everyone's having a panic. So we've got to make it's critical that these companies have plans in place prior to an attack as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that there has to be an element of flexibility in there, in that plan, because you never really know what's going to happen until it actually happens. But you need a plan in place, you need a team in place, you need to know who's going to be dealing with it when something does happen. But I don't think I've ever seen any incident follow the set plan that's been put in place, because it's just so unpredictable what will actually transpire when the inevitable does happen. So there has to be flexibility. I always say that the key things for me are understanding who your team is, as I've said. So identifying key personnel in the different areas of the business. So someone in the IT team, someone in the probably the marketing team and the customer service team, someone in operations, if it's they've got a warehouse or distribution, someone who understands that, a key person from each sector within an organization who is primed and ready to join a call in the event that there is an incident and they are ready to be called. If you have that key team, it saves a lot of time when the incident happens, because otherwise you've got to assemble it on the fly, at the drop of a hat, and that's quite difficult to do. So that's a key thing. And I think the other aspect, tying it back to sanctions, is have a discussion around what the company's thoughts are around paying ransoms generally. I've acted for some organizations where they've already discussed this, and they have a line on it, a company line, and they stick to it. So again, it saves time, because you don't have these boardroom discussions that delay situations where you're dealing with threat actors, because the company's already agreed that this is going to be our line, come what may.
No, brilliant.
Yeah, and I think perhaps that also focuses the mind pre-incident that we're not gonna so we should have some sort of last resort, and that's the kind of we know that we're not going to engage, so therefore we need to make sure that we at least have something to rebuild from.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah. And I think with that as well, again, we've dealt with clients where they know their position, which is fantastic. You get on a call, and that first call, they already know their position. I think that did change slightly when the threat moved away from just encryption to data theft and extortion, because then it's not just about unlocking your files. That's not where the risk is anymore, because we can recover from that. The problem was what happens with that data after it's left the systems, and that's where, again, it's just a different dynamic. It's a different landscape. So how do you approach that risk? What is there to consider? And again, when it comes to actually making a payment, what is that going to look like? So definitely, I agree, having those conversations before an incident so that you know your position is definitely really good advice.
Brilliant. Well, we're entering the Q&A portion of our webinar now. So if anyone else does have any questions that they'd like us to address, please do enter them into either the chat or the question and answer function in Zoom, and we'll get that to that for you. We've had a few come in already, so we've got one here from Robert. Thoughts on the possibility of all ransomware payments being made illegal and the possible impact this may have, both positive and negative? Who would like to go with that one first?
Well, I'll kick things off with that one. So, I mean, first of all, the first point there is that the actual payment of a ransom is not illegal at this current time. There's no laws or regulations which criminalize the payment of a ransom. There are obviously sanctions issues that we've been discussing, but they are separate to the actual physical payment of a ransom. That all ties back to a lot of shipping and piracy cases, which historically have allowed these sort of payments to be made, and there have been some quite large international cases on that, where the court has found that there is no rule to say you can't pay a ransom. I suppose that the question that comes to my mind there is that, or the issue is that by making ransoms illegal, it potentially criminalizes a victim. So you've got organizations that find themselves in these situations, and if they have no choice, notwithstanding the sanctions issues, then it's potentially criminalizing organization which is already a victim if they do decide to go down that route. And I suppose that sort of is probably something that will be difficult for any government or court to get to a position on. And I think that ties back to some of the cases in the shipping and the piracy industry. So I think obviously it would, if that was the case, it would cut down the amount of payments that are made. It would cut off the flow of funds to these criminal organizations. But I guess would it actually stop payments being made? And when it comes down to commerce and it comes down to the viability of businesses, you're probably still going to find some companies that are willing to take that risk. But I know it's been talked about in terms of making ransom payments illegal, but I think it would be quite challenging to do that across the world anyway.
Yeah, and I think as well, in my time doing this, I think there's a tiny fraction of insureds that are paying this simply because it's more, it's easier than recovering from backups. They're normally paying because they are, they're in really dire straits here. So I think if while yes, you probably would get some benefit from, kind of what we were talking about with, if an insured takes the kind of early decision not to engage, they might focus their mind on having an appropriate kind of response protocol that doesn't involve the payment of ransoms. But I think there's going to have to be an acceptance that, there's going to have to be some sort of level of support or something will need to kind of be done to acknowledge that, these companies aren't paying because they want to, they're paying because they're on their knees, sort of thing. So I think
the last resort. It's not.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I think that would be my kind of view on it.
Brilliant.
My view would be, if put yourself in that shoe. Not all of us have been in that position. Some people watching this may have been in that position. And the fact of the matter is, I think if you're a small, medium business and it becomes illegal, so therefore you're probably not going to be insured for that type of event, i.e. to pay the ransom, what you're going to probably see, and this will more than likely happen, organizations, if they're on their knees and the only way to keep their business going is to pay a ransom, then they're more than likely just going to pay a ransom and not report it. It's going to go under the table, right? And I think the criminality is going to continue, and it's just going to have to happen. Otherwise, businesses are going to be closing left, right, and centre because they physically cannot recover from this. And there's already statistics out there that show how many businesses struggle to survive after this type of event anyway. Add the added layer of not actually paying any ransom or being able to pay a ransom, what position does that leave them in? So yeah, I think it's a very complex scenario, and I think it can have lots of different effects on different individuals and stakeholders.
So we've had another question in from Justin. Do you think there will be an increase in insurers mandating proactive services like managed detection and response before providing cyber insurance?
Yeah, I think that, like I mentioned, I think, that level of expectation around security standards is definitely, going up, and there's going to be an expectation that, insureds are proactively, or prospective insureds are, proactively protecting themselves. I know for ages, insurers have always also, offered a lot of, pre-breach offerings. And I think when the market was relatively soft and, there was no kind of, there was, it wasn't a real big take up on it. There wasn't, nobody really kind of, thought about it. They got the policy, they got protected. So I'd say on one hand, yes, there's kind of going to be a level of expectation. I don't know whether that's going to be, MDR, but there's going to be a level of expectation for insureds that want cyber insurance now that they are, that they're doing everything they can to protect themselves within reason. But I think also what we're starting to see is that, insureds are wanting to take up these kind of breach services and in a way that wasn't being done, let's say 2018, 2017. Because I think they are understanding the risks. And I think as well, just from like a purely cynical perspective, if you're paying a lot of money for a policy, you're all of a sudden going to really want to make sure that you're using all the complementary services that are being offered there. So I think, so yeah, I guess kind of answer that in a bit of a roundabout way, but yeah.
No, brilliant. So, I mean, over the last probably year, even longer, I mean, it's been an expectation that there'd be at least multi-factor authentication on all your systems anyway, wasn't there? But now we are seeing that extra level being introduced by quite a few insurers to, at least make sure that you've got some level of security in place already. We have had another question from George. Do you foresee these types of attacks increasing over the next 5 years? And if yes, will it be incremental or exponential?
I can probably kick that one off.
Yeah.
It's interesting. So ransomware has been around for a while, right? It has been. It's the severity has definitely increased, I'd say. We're seeing more and more of it. Can I see it exploding overnight and becoming even more popular than what it is now? Potentially. At the end of the day, you think about the amount of businesses and organizations that are out there, the lack of funding that these organizations have, and investment into their sort of security posture and IT systems. I think there's been a lot of factors that have also been limiting. So we all know businesses have struggled through COVID. Some have been really successful, but a lot haven't. They've struggled. So where do they need to focus their investments and their funds? So I think in the short term, I cannot see ransomware going away. I can see it evolving. I can see it changing, just like we saw it with the data exfiltration element. So I think there will be additional layers. We are definitely seeing threat actors being more ruthless now. So it doesn't just end with a ransom note. We're seeing phone calls being made to CEOs, communications being intercepted. So I think there'll be additional layers that are introduced over the next few years. I personally cannot see this going away. I don't think it's necessarily going to decrease. I think it will increase, but I think it will be evolved. I think it'll evolve. It won't be what we know today. There'll be the next wave. There'll be the next thing over the next few years. So I'm not sure what Ollie's thoughts are on that as well. I'll be curious to hear. But you should unmute yourself first, Ollie. There you go. Someone had to do it.
All right.
There's always one.
So we have started to see a bit of an evolution, like you say, Kadir, over the past, I say maybe 6 months or so, and I think that's probably due to the fact that it's becoming easier for more unsophisticated individuals to carry out sophisticated attacks. The tools are becoming much more easily and readily available online. And I think that's going to really increase, particularly in the current political and geopolitical situation we've got. It's going to be, if threat groups want to stay under the radar, they'll need to stay anonymous to some extent. They won't want to affiliate themselves with Russia, perhaps, in order to avoid those sanctions issues. They'll want to make sure that they're staying away from sanctions. There's going to be a lot more fluidity for them to try and avoid this, because as soon as someone's named on those sanctions lists, they'll want to regroup. We've seen that in the past, but if with more impetus behind governments to ensure that these sanctions lists are kept up to date and include ransomware groups, named groups, then they're going to need to be nimble on their feet if they want to stay off those radars. So I think that's, in my view, where I see the evolution continuing. It's going to go towards more unknown or unsophisticated actors, rather than the big branded groups that we've been seeing over the past couple of years. That's perhaps the way that we're going to see things changing a little bit. Harry, any views?
Yeah, I think you kind of pointed out the kind of fraught geopolitical situation we're in now, and I think the one thing that I could see perhaps making ransomware worse, or it's probably could be a real driver of it, is that if the West and Russia kind of remain in kind of open economic war with each other, or are these guys going to become almost akin to privateers or something like that, where essentially they're seen as a income stream into Russia, especially if sanctions regimes are maintained and are strict or even get bigger. You wonder whether ransomware is going to become perhaps wrapped up in that, or a pawn in that. So I think that would probably be the risk that I see. But other than that, yeah, I think Kadir and Ollie have kind of pointed out that we don't really know, but we're making educated guesses. But yeah, it's kind of a wait and see.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to go away though.
No,
we can all agree on that.
Not anytime soon. Not anytime soon.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and all of your input in the discussion. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. That's it for this month's webinar. So for everyone who joined us and registered, we will be sending out the replay link as soon as possible, hopefully tomorrow, if not Monday. And if you do think of any questions for any of our panelists that and you may have missed out, feel free to email us at communications@cyberclan.com, and we will pass those questions on and try and get a response for you. But from all of us here today, we'd just like to thank you for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you on our next webinar. Thanks. Goodbye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks all.